As always, let's go ahead and get started with our presenters for today. First of all, we have Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI. We have Rick Kenin, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Transportation with Boston MedFlight and the Chair of the HAI Safety Working Group. The operator members of HAI have also recently elected Rick to the HAI Board of Directors, and he will join our board on July 1. Welcome, Rick. We have Shaun Williams, who is the Senior Aviation Accident Investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board. He's a former aviation safety inspector for the FAA, and he's an ATP holder with over 5,600 flight hours. We have Matthew Rigsby, who is the Air Safety Investigator for the FAA Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention, and he is also an advisor for the HAI Safety Working Group. We have Matt Cabak, who is the Team Lead Accident Investigations Division, Office of Accident Investigations and Prevention with the FAA. We have Clint Johnson, who is the Chief of the National Transportation Safety Board, Alaska Aviation Regional Office in Anchorage, Alaska, and he's also an advisor to the Safety Working Group. This is an interactive webinar. We do appreciate your questions. Please use the question module, not the chat module, down in the bottom of your screen or the side of your screen, depending on what kind of device you're using to watch the webinar. Please submit those questions in writing. We will not necessarily be able to acknowledge the receipt, but we will do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. We will do our absolute best to get to everyone, but we'll see how things go. As always, this webinar is being recorded. We will be posting the webinar as soon as possible after the webinar is over. Usually it's tomorrow or the next day tomorrow or Monday on the HAI website at rotor.org/webinars. That's it for right now. I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI.
All right, Dan. Now I'm having a little technical diction. All right, here we go. All right. Well, thanks, Dan, for turning that over. You know, since the last year we started doing these type of webinars, one of the topics that usually gather the most attention seems to be always related to rotorcraft accidents. And if you follow Rotorcraft Daily's news aggregator, the subject that typically gets the most clicks is accidents and incidents. You know, I kind of get it that people in our industry have a vested interest in what leads to a helicopter accident. And I would like to think that the people who are watching our webinars or reading the stories are looking for that lesson that they can apply to their training in hopes that they don't make the same mistake. And that is what we hope for as well. So are you asking yourself, what did that person do wrong? So it helps to understand the different scenarios, and we support those lessons for that same reason. We're holding this webinar today. I mean, I remember doing this one last year, and it was right after we had the unfortunate accident of Calabasas. And some of the same players here today that we're going to do it out in California. So we usually hold the seminar then, and of course this year we didn't have it because we didn't gather in New Orleans. But if these webinars and the news stories are so popular, why do the accidents keep happening? It is because maybe overconfidence in one's ability, or is it the result of external pressures? Probably a combination of all of these, or maybe it's just something entirely different. So the most single powerful tool that you have in your helicopter is you. It's that human. You have the decisions to make what will affect the outcome of the flight, or even if there will be a flight at all. The truly good pilots, you know, and I really don't want to say the good pilots, it's too open-ended. The true PIC, the pilot in command, knows when to say no. And while the pilot shortage is slowed down a bit by the pandemic, pilots should feel less and less pressure to keep flying for employees who may not have the right safety culture. Among other safety programs, HAI has the Land and Live program. My predecessor once wrote a comment for Rotor magazine suggesting that pilots keep a cardboard box right next to your desk or whatever you call home, or maybe even your locker, so that when things just aren't right, or there's somebody asks you to do something that you don't agree in, you can pack up your things and go on to that next chapter. So there are many other safety programs from around the world that offer these same type messages of when to walk away, essentially, or say no. It is unfortunate in a way that we have to keep repeating these programs, and that you're here today, because we should all understand how to keep ourselves and our passengers safe. That being said, I am very, very glad that you are here and taking the time to watch the professionals today that are doing the work. And we always, when we have NTSB people on board, we want to put them out of business. So it's an opportunity for you to learn from the fatal mistakes made by another pilot. I hope you share the lessons and the message from today's panelists with all that you work with, and both maintenance and pilots. I would now like to ask Rick Kenin to join me and get this webinar started. As Dan mentioned, he is the chair of the HAI Safety Working Group, and our operators members just recently elected him to the board of directors. So I look forward to working with him in that capacity when he starts in July. So Rick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim and Dan, and thank you for allowing the Safety Working Group this webinar time to present our Safety Symposium. I'll start with a shameless plug. This presentation is brought to you today by the HAI Safety Working Group. If you're not familiar with the Safety Working Group, this is a hardworking group of about 25 safety professionals from across the industry and across the globe. We work to address safety challenges that affect our industry. We work through education, safety promotion, and coordination. We work closely with the other HAI working groups, the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, the Vertical Aviation Safety Team, and other industry associations, including a very unique partnership we have with the National Business Aviation Association. If you have an interest in joining our group, please check out the Working Group tab on the rotor.org website. And now on with the show. By way of introduction, in a typical year, as Jim mentioned, the Safety Symposium is the first seminar presented at HELI-EXPO, and it typically occurs on the Monday morning before the expo even opens. But of course, this has not been a typical year, so we are privileged to present this seminar in webinar format as part of the HAI at Work program. The purpose of the Safety Symposium is to unpack a safety challenge that currently faces the vertical lift industry. That challenge is analyzed under the lens of a recent aviation accident. In the past, we looked at doors off operations in light of the 2018 Tor helicopter crash into New York City's East River. We also looked at aviation decision-making and safety management systems by focusing on 2 EMS crashes that happened in Tennessee back in 2013 and 2014. This year, we're focused on inadvertent IMC and safety culture. We will be examining the crash of a helicopter air ambulance in Zaleski, Ohio that occurred in 2019. Today, as in previous safety symposiums, we will begin with the lead NTSB investigator providing the raw analysis of what happened and the causal factors related to the crash. Then we will have a discussion with the FAA and NTSB leadership to understand the larger issues related to this crash that impact our entire industry. And after all that, it will be your turn to engage our speakers with your questions through the Q&A function on your screens. As I say each year at the symposium, and as my 3rd grade teacher taught me a long, long time ago, a question is a series of words that ends in a question mark. If it doesn't end in a question mark, then it's a statement. So please ask informative questions, and we'll be happy to share them with the rest of the panel. And now I welcome Shaun Williams to join our webinar and analyze the 2019 crash in Zaleski, Ohio. Shaun, if you'll turn on your camera, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rick. Here. So thank you, Rick, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to present this totally preventable accident. I know this has been a tough time for everybody and may continue to be a tough year during the recovery phase of COVID-19. which is why discussing safety cultures is especially important. There are going to be pressures placed upon you. Some of these will be self-induced, such as, I think I can squeeze this flight in before the weather gets here. Or yeah, I'm a little tired, but if I can just do this one more, I'll be that much closer to turning a profit or keeping on an extra employee. And some of these will come from the outside, as in if you don't do this flight, I'll go down the street and get someone else who is hurting to do it. So this is why we're here today, having a solid and healthy safety culture where the risks are mitigated for you can aid in reducing that pressure and keep you from finding yourself in a situation that you may later regret. So with that in mind, I want to start today with a case study to highlight the safety cultures in risk management. Some of you may have heard of this one and some maybe not. It involves a Bell 407 helicopter air ambulance that crashed in January of 2019, about 4 miles northeast of Zaleski, Ohio. Now, even though this is an HAI operation, and not all of you are HAI operators, there are some safety lessons to take away from it. So I want you to keep one thing in mind as we work through it, and that's a quote by Dr. James Reason. He says, "It's worth pointing out that if you are convinced that your organization has a healthy safety culture, you are almost certainly mistaken." He goes on to state that a safety culture is something that is striven for but rarely attained, and the process is more important than the product. So let's get right to it. This accident took place on January 29th, 2019 at 6:50 in the morning. The commercial pilot, flight nurse, and flight paramedic were fatally injured, and the helicopter was destroyed. The helicopter was being operated by Viking Aviation LLC, doing business as survival flight under Part 135 as a VFR helicopter air ambulance flight. On the day of the accident, MedFlight of Ohio, an HAI operator, was contacted by the Holzer Meigs Emergency Department with a request for an inter-facility patient transfer. They declined immediately, citing icing probability and snow squalls en route. So I want to take a second, and I want to start a timer. You'll see why here in just a second. Let's go ahead and get this started. The emergency department then contacted HealthNet with the same flight request. HealthNet stated they would need to do a weather check and call them back. While waiting for HealthNet to call back, the emergency department contacted the Survival Flight OCC, or Operations Control Center. This stated they would also need to perform a weather check. Based upon recorded phone call timestamps, from the time the Survival Flight was contacted until the time they accepted the flight, only about 28 seconds had elapsed. So think about that. 28 seconds to do a comprehensive weather check. How long does it take you? Do you think that's long enough? After Survival Flight had accepted the flight, HealthNet called back to decline the flight due to low ceilings and icing. When Survival Flight accepted the flight request, it was the night shift pilot who initially accepted it. He contacted the accident pilot while she was on her way to the base, briefed her on the request, and asked if she wanted to take the flight. She agreed, stated she was 5 minutes from the pad, would meet the crew there, and declined NVGs. After notifying the OCC that the accident pilot would fly the flight, the night shift pilot notified the med crew, proceeded to the helipad, conducted the pre-flight, and started the engine. At 6:28, the helicopter departed the Mount Carmel Hospital in Grove City for the 69-mile flight to the Holzer Meigs Emergency Department in Pomeroy. After departure, the helicopter traveled relatively straight on a southeast heading. The star on this map indicates the location of the accident in relation to the departure and destination. A review of archived weather data revealed the helicopter flew through 2 snow bands en route to the Holzer Meigs Emergency Department. This image depicts their location along the flight path in addition to the helicopter's altitude as shown in red, and the terrain elevation as shown in green. The times and altitudes depicted correspond to the helicopter's entry and exit of the snow bands. Terminal Doppler weather radar data indicated that the second band of precipitation had higher intensity echoes than the first band. The onboard data from the helicopter ended at 650 as the helicopter was climbing through 1,500 feet. The final recorded bank angle and speed was consistent with the helicopter flying along a 180-degree descending left turn to the impact location. Although the 180-degree turn was consistent with an inadvertent IMC escape maneuver, the loss of altitude was not. The accident occurred on a nearly opposite heading of the intended flight path. The night shift pilot on duty when the accident flight request came in failed to identify en route weather hazards and accepted the accident flight for the incoming day shift pilot because he knew she was on her way to the base. The accident pilot accepted the flight based on his evaluations of weather and other risks, proceeding directly to the helipad where the helicopter was already running. The NTSB believes that these events precluded the opportunity for the accident pilot to perform her own comprehensive pre-flight risk assessment, which comprised safety. Regulations and company procedures required helicopter air ambulance pilots to complete an approved flight risk assessment prior to each flight. In the case of the accident flight, the accident pilot had not completed a risk assessment form, and the night shift pilot stated that he expected she would have completed it after returning from the flight. Additionally, the forms in use at the time of the accident didn't include determination of flight refusal by other operators or en route weather evaluation as required by regulations. So tell me this, what benefit is there to doing a pre-flight risk assessment post-flight? Where is the value in the tool at all if you don't even include en route weather? Because survival flight had more than 10 helicopters, they were required by federal regulations to have an operations control center, whose pre-flight functional intent was to work with pilots in properly identifying risks and mitigating those risks to an acceptable level. In the case of the accident flight, several required elements of the flight risk assessment and mitigation plan were overlooked, such as the OCC specialist on duty failed to identify weather hazards that existed along the helicopter's intended route of flight, and he didn't determine if the flight request had been refused by other operators as required by regulations. These deficiencies resulted in an incomplete picture of the associated flight risks. Granted, this was one flight. Could this be a one-off event? Well, luckily, the helicopter was equipped with an outer link system, which contained many, many more flights. And crews, they were not shy when it came to talking about previous flights. We were able to access the data from the outer link and compare it to the weather at the time. Here's what we found. During an interview, the base lead pilot provided this flight as an example where he believed the flight could be conducted, but the medical crew's concerns drove the decision to abort. The nurse had noticed a large area of gray and blue on the weather map. However, when she asked the lead pilot about the weather, he stated it was all clear and they needed to get going. She and the paramedic noted thick snow falling during the flight, and the pilot asked the paramedic to use her NVGs to look outside since he could not see through the heavy snowfall with his. Both the nurse and the paramedic continued to report deteriorating visibility until they could no longer see features outside. After the crew had agreed to abort the flight, the pilot continued to fly towards the destination rather than returning to base. They then decided to land at an airport in sight and wait for the weather to pass. However, after approaching the runway, the pilot climbed again and continued the flight to Grove City. But you may be thinking, okay, Shaun, that's just two. It happens. But during a flight from Cleveland to Columbus, just 15 days before the accident, this flight encountered heavy fog and reduced visibility. During pre-flight, the pilot had noted that there was an area reporting below weather minimums between Cleveland and Columbus. The medical crew voiced concerns about low visibility during the flight. The paramedics stated that they became engulfed in it. It was a complete whiteout. We lost sight of the ground. We lost sight of everything. The pilot verbalized that he was beginning a standard rate turn, and they exited IMC conditions about a minute later. After approaching a town that was in VMC conditions, the crew began brainstorming where they could land the helicopter to wait out the weather. Instead of landing, the pilot elected to use Mansfield Tower Airport to guide them to the highway. The paramedics stated that once we left the town, then we went straight back into marginal conditions. After intercepting Interstate 71, they flew south along the highway towards Columbus. Upon hearing that another aircraft reported clear conditions at 1,000 feet, the paramedics said they essentially left from following the middle of the highway, being able to see the highway. We rose through the clouds until we lost visibility with the ground. According to the paramedic, the flight descended back down to follow the highway. They then landed at Columbus for fuel. Now we have 3. Is this all? Probably not. And when reviewing the debriefing forums, we found other instances of flight through snow showers. We did not go and pull each and every one of those to see how low the flight went or where the terrain was in the area. These 2 additional flights were important because at least one of them involved the base lead pilot. Shouldn't the lead pilot be leading by example? So what could have contributed to this push for flight in lower weather? Survival Flight had developed a quick reference guide that was distributed to hospitals and fire departments. The clinical base manager for the Ohio base stated she developed the card in an effort to aid in public relations, highlight survival flight services, and facilitate patient transfers. When asked about item 5 in the list, this stated, "Our weather minimums are different. If other companies turn down the flight for weather, call us. If we can fly you safely and take the patient safely to another facility, we will." She said that it was her understanding that they operated at minimum FAA weather standards, while other companies had raised their minimums, and therefore that allowed them to take flights that other companies could not. After developing this card, she said she received approval from the VP of EMS services, and it was sent to the public relations and marketing manager for approval. When asked about the card, this manager, who was also the OCC manager at the time of the accident, stated that the first time she had seen the card was on social media. Survival Flight's poor safety culture was demonstrated by the lack of effective risk management by its personnel. This included advertising that they operate in lower weather minimums. Management also expected crews to be airborne within 7 minutes of getting a flight request, a time not always conducive to completing a comprehensive weather check and pre-flight risk assessment. This time started when the tone went off until the skids were up. Included the time to check the weather, walk or run to the pad, pre-flight the machine, start the engines, load the GPS, and depart. This poor safety culture fostered an environment where pilots responded to management pressure to fly at the expense of complying with regulations and standard operating procedures. The accident pilot's decision to accept the accident flight without receiving a shift change briefing and conducting an adequate pre-flight risk assessment was likely influenced by management's lack of support for SOP compliance. In addition to not following its own SOPs, Survival Flight lacked a safety management system, or SMS. While not a requirement for Part 135 operators, SMS is recognized as an effective way to establish and reinforce a positive safety culture and identify and correct deviations from SOPs. At the end of the day, the board adopted a probable cause that included in the main causal factors the inadequate management of safety and the pilot's inadvertent encounter with IMC, failure to maintain altitude, and subsequent collision with terrain. Now let's talk about the safety culture just a little bit. During interviews, it became evident that everything, and I mean everything, stopped with the director of operations. In the organizational chart, even the director of maintenance answered to the director of operations. So now that we know the backstory, let's talk about the safety culture. Safety culture is defined by the US Regulatory Commission as the core values and behaviors resulting from a collective commitment by leaders and individuals to emphasize safety over competing goals to ensure protection of people and the environment. Dr. Reason stated that a safety culture needs certain elements, among them a just culture, a reporting culture, and an informed culture. There is indisputable evidence that these components were absent here. So let's break them down here just a little bit. Just culture. It's an atmosphere of trust in which people are encouraged or even rewarded for providing safety-related information, but in which they are also clear about where the line must be drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. In his interview with us, the DO said that he tried to have people explain just culture to him. He said he wasn't sure how it worked. He believed it was where you create an environment by which everyone felt more equal in the decision making. Not only was his description of just culture badly mistaken, but further demonstrating its absence at survival flight was management's actions of yelling at pilots and cussing at them for declining flights. With a reporting culture, employees are open and encouraged to report safety problems. They have assurances that the information will be acted upon, and further assurances that they will not be ridiculed for reporting such concerns. At survival flight, one employee said that he knew of no official way to report safety concerns. In fact, according to the director of safety and training, they had only received one report in the year and a half he had been in that position. Furthermore, he told us he knew pilots were not comfortable reporting safety issues to management. A culture of fear and a culture of safety cannot coexist. And finally, an informed culture. Organizations striving for an informed culture are fastidious about collecting and analyzing data to stay informed about the safety and health of the organization. Despite having recording capability aboard its aircraft, survival flight did not attempt to analyze these data. The director of operations said that it took a long time to download a file, and then I don't know what you'll do with it. Collecting data without analyzing it provides zero safety feedback, yet that's the way survival flight operated. Think about the benefit of seeing those previous flights I showed you. Could that have led to any changes? Those operations appear to have taken place in IMC, as did the accident flight. The board even included the inadvertent IMC encounter in the probable cause. So I know I've been talking a little bit here, but do you remember what I called this at the very beginning? A totally preventable accident. IMC encounters in collision with terrain can be prevented, and that's something that is proven on a daily basis. With that in mind, Matt Rigsby from the FAA's Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention will continue with a discussion on inadvertent IMC. Matt?
Okay. Thank you, Shaun, and thank you, everybody. Good afternoon to our U.S. partners, and good evening to our international partners, and good morning. Thank you for joining us today. And like Shaun said, I'm going to cover just a little bit about the IMC now that they've recognized it. I think anybody would admit that this, the Shaun's accident is an obvious sign of whether it's, I don't know if you necessarily call it unintended IMC or, inadvertent IMC, but there appears to be, some possibly intent. Everybody would agree that the great equalizer is Mother Nature out there. And I think everybody would agree that if you're approaching something like you see in the picture there, that you would make a better decision and divert around that, or potentially land until a safer option arrived for you. Unfortunately, that previous picture isn't what most of the inadvertent IMC accidents happen in. It's weather like this. It's the operator or the individual pilot, as Jim said, that makes that decision to give it a try. I can't tell you how many accidents that I myself have done, and I'm sure Shaun and the other investigators online have done, where you get to a site and they say, yeah, we thought we'd give it a try, or the pilot regularly would say you give it a try. There's such a environment out there of giving it a try that the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team accident statistics did a study and revealed that a helicopter pilot who unintentionally continues VFR flight into IMC condition is very likely to lose control of that aircraft and be dead within a mean time of about 56 seconds. HAI, to try to help prevent this, will soon be coming out with a learning module based on this whole 56 seconds to live and based on a video. As you can see there, Nick Mayhew, who's the industry co-chair with the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, is the one that's quoted there. Going in and looking at the statistics from the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, and this is consistent whether you're in the U.S. or in the international, the loss of control is pretty much a predominant cause of helicopter accidents throughout the world. As you can see there, from the 2009 to 2018, of the 198 accidents, the top 3 contributors were lost control, striking an object during low altitude ops, and unintended flight into IMC conditions. While some of the accidents from the 2019 are not fully concluded, preliminary analysis that has been conducted accounts for 33% of the accidents. 8 of 24 involved UIMC, or unintended flight in meteorological conditions, or inadvertent flight in meteorological conditions, moving it to the highest occurrence category for that year. So nearly twice as high as what was observed in 2009 and 2018. So the accidents are happening. What can we do to stop it? If you continue on to do the research, the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team, it has a helicopter safety enhancement program. They've done some additional studies and have proven that the degraded visual environment that leads to the spatial disorientation, which leads to loss of control, happens regardless of the pilot experience. It doesn't matter if you're a low time, a high time, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't care what industry you're flying in. It can happen to anybody. A lot of times it's with the best intentions that somebody's trying to get the job done, they enter these conditions and then lose control. The study revealed that the average age for the pilot that this occurs to is 48 years old. His total flight time is 2,673 hours, and that's both rotary wing and fixed wing. So this isn't just a rotary wing problem. And with an average rotary wing hours of 2,161 hours. Total hours in make and model is 609 hours. So it can happen to anybody. A lot of times people think, well, it's low time, inexperienced, not familiar with the area, that type of thing. It's not so. It can happen to anybody. And no aviator is exempt from it. From the FAA standpoint, we've tried to publish some guidance out there in the helicopter flying handbook. And this is probably one of the areas where we recognize, and I think the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team and everybody recognizes that there's not one prescriptive program that works for everybody. It's kind of like armpits. When you get into it, they're all hairy, and you just have to figure out what's best for you as a pilot and your organization as a company on how to get out of this inadvertent IMC. The U.S. Army training has something called AHTTA, or All Helicopters Turn Towards Alabama. Attitude, roll wings level, level the nose on the horizon, turn only to avoid obstacles. You want to minimize that head movement and anything getting the vestibular system rotating. Torque, set your power as available, should be muscle memory to check during the action sets. Trim the aircraft, keep the aircraft in trim, don't get into a side slip or everything. And then airspeed, watch your airspeed, keep your airspeed consistent. And we recognize that this isn't perfect for everyone. This is just a recommended, based on tried and true training throughout the years. Again, after initiating those immediate action steps, the pilot needs to establish his standard instrument scan. It doesn't matter if you're on the old analog gauges or the glass cockpit, you want to continue and prioritize that scan of your attitude, airspeed, and torque. First rule of everything, by all means, aviate, fly the aircraft at all cost. The primary consideration should be maintaining control of that aircraft. Navigate, once you get that initial recovery, it is likely that straight and level is sufficient navigation. Plan your way out, know where you may go, should you go inadvertent IMC. And then lastly, communicate. We've all heard of the climb, call, and confess. Communication is probably one of the areas that we haven't touched on as an industry enough. And I think there's a fear out there among helicopter pilots to declare an emergency out there. Speaking from the regulator standpoint, I think part of it is just they're afraid of what happens if they declare an emergency, and is the FAA going to come in and violate it? It's not the case. So this is one of the reasons we wanted to explore more of this and try to educate people more. Once you contact ATC, declare that emergency. If possible, squawk if necessary. If it may be better you keep your squawk. And ATC is there to help you. They're a tool in your toolbox that may help you get out of the inadvertent IMC conditions or get to somewhere safely where you can do possibly an instrument approach if you're qualifying the aircraft's capable to get through the instrument conditions and get to an airport safely. I'll introduce my team lead and colleague, Matt Cabak, who is our team lead for AVP, and he is also a former air traffic controller. He's going to shed some additional light on that communication piece. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Cabak from our group. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for the introduction, Matt. As he said, I'm a former air traffic controller, and in my career as a controller, I've worked many of emergency aircraft into a successful outcome. But the only aircraft I can help are the ones whose pilots admit that they're in trouble and dial up a frequency and call for help. So this is where we want to talk a little bit more about what we can do for you if you make that call. First things first, there's the most important thing for you to do if you're starting to get into any trouble is to fly your aircraft. As Matt said, aviate, navigate, communicate. There's nothing I can do as a controller to help you. And there's nothing I'm about to tell you in the upcoming slides that can help you if you don't maintain control of your aircraft. After you've gotten control of your aircraft, that's when you can start to look for other options. But before we get into trouble, one of the most important things is situational awareness. And that is knowing your weather, knowing your location, knowing what's around you. And obviously a good pre-flight and a good weather briefing is worth every second of your time it takes to complete that. But while you're airborne, one of the additional ways you can gain additional situational awareness is to monitor ATC frequencies. Even if you're VFR, even if you're leaving from a hospital and going to another hospital and not going anywhere near an airport, there's a good chance that you can gain a lot of information by monitoring ATC frequencies. You'll often hear traffic calls and you'll recognize that your aircraft is being pointed out to other airplanes in the area. That gives you situational awareness for traffic in your area. But additionally, you'll be able to hear what's going on with weather conditions around you. You'll hear the controllers talk about weather. They'll be describing weather conditions to other aircraft. You might even hear them read METAR sequences when necessary. You'll definitely hear some important weather broadcasts like AirMets, SIGMETs, and center weather advisories. But you'll also hear other pilots talking about their conditions in the form of providing pilot reports, or ATC will be issuing pilot reports to other pilots. These can be very important to complete the picture for you as to know what weather conditions are going on in your area. There's a number of ways to reach out to air traffic control. You can reference your charts, reference your navigation equipment. There's typically frequencies listed somewhere on your screen that you can help. You also have on paper charts, it's also listed everywhere. If you're not near an approach control or a tower, look for an en route center that can provide help for you, and they'll definitely help you, even aircraft down low. Another benefit is monitoring guard frequency. The international guard frequency of 121.5, the international emergency frequency. You'll be able to hear other aircraft in distress, and when you're not the one in distress, you might be able to provide help to another aircraft. But additionally, you might be able to reach other pilots that can help you as well. A number of operators, commercial operators, have it in their op specs to monitor 121.5. And if you're in trouble and have no other options, you don't know any other frequencies, this is your quickest, easiest way to get attention for someone, and they can help you understand what's going on in your area. If you do get into trouble, ATC is here to help. We're not here to process violations. We're not here to do any of that. We want to help you get safely from where you are to where you need to go, or to where you don't need to go, whether it might be diverting to another safer location. We're here to help in any way we can. Most important thing, find a frequency, and when you do, listen to it for a few moments. Get some of that situational awareness that I talked about already. If you have weather questions and you're not already into the IMC conditions, some of your weather questions might be answered before you even ask it by other pilots. Once you do establish communications, provide your call sign and then wait to be acknowledged. If you provide your call sign and rattle through an entire request, there's a very good chance the controller is not going to understand who you are, what you are, what you need. Always ask for weather conditions if you need. Controllers have a wealth of resources at their fingertips, ready to help, to gather some conditions for you that can help inform your flight. And if you need to, or if you want to, ask for VFR flight following. Here in the US, it's a popular option. It helps you maintain connectivity with controllers, and it helps you know where you need to be, which frequency you need to be on to be able to gather that situational awareness. And if you're starting to get nervous about the weather conditions around you, express that. Controllers are working multiple aircraft. They can't keep track of everybody's current weather conditions without being asked. They'll provide the displayed precipitation, but if you need additional weather information, whether it's icing or low-level clouds or whatever you might need, we have that information available. So reach out and we can provide that assistance. As I said, we can provide you with METARs, which are automated aeronautical weather reporting. We can also, when we know where you are and what you need, we can solicit other airplanes in your area or in different areas to provide information. This gives us a great opportunity to be able to find the conditions that you need and maybe steer you in a direction that you maybe weren't expecting to go, but it might be the best option. And additionally, here in the US and in many countries around the world, many controllers are also pilots. Some of them are instrument rated, some are CFIs, CFIIs. Those controllers are of crucial importance to help you understand what's going on in your airspace, and they can help you with issues controlling your aircraft. They can help talk you through some things that once you get flustered, you may not think about. But as Matt said, the one quickest way to get anybody's attention is to declare the emergency. The emergency word generates attention, but good attention. This will make people recognize that you are in trouble and that you need help. Now the controller knows that they need to help you. They can oftentimes notify their supervisor or other controllers in their control element. They can get more help for you. Now while this controller is talking to you and talking you through everything, the other controllers can be gathering all that weather information to help them provide information. Oftentimes, myself as a controller, I can start to feel when a pilot's starting to feel nervous or getting into trouble. The controller might declare the emergency for you. So if you're not being specific, but we think that there's an emergency situation, we might declare that emergency for you. And for no other reason than it opens up some options for us. It gets us some additional help, and it makes some things a little bit easier in an effort to help you. ATC, especially in the US, but in most countries, will ask you two questions typically when you declare an emergency. The first one is, how many souls are on board the aircraft? This is very important for us in the event that search and rescue becomes necessary. This will help us know how many people to look for if the worst should happen. But the other, probably more important question is fuel remaining in time. And what this does is it helps the controller know how long you can remain in the air and how far you can go before we find you better weather conditions. If you only have a half hour of fuel remaining, we know that it's a extremely urgent situation. We need to find you good weather as close as possible. If you have an hour or 2 hours worth of fuel on board, we might be able to turn you in a direction where the weather's improving. The ceilings are rising, visibility is getting better. We can point you in a direction that'll get you to good weather, but we have a little more time to play with and a little more time to get you what you need. As we've talked about, you know, if you want to follow ATC instructions to a point, if you are the pilot in command of your ship, and if you feel like the instructions are putting you in more danger, or they're not helpful, or they're not going to solve your situation, the words unable are an important resource in your toolbox. If you're busy trying to maintain control of your aircraft, the word standby is an important resource in your toolbox. ATC might be asking you a lot of questions or issuing you a lot of instructions trying to help you. That is all they're doing, is trying to help you. But if it's overwhelming you and if it's not working for you, standby or unable, and get the controller to recognize that you're busy and you need to accommodate yourself in your flight deck before you proceed on. And also, as a controller is providing a plan for you of trying to get you to better weather, obviously they can't see the conditions out your window. So if you see things that they don't see, say so. If you don't like the plan, say so. It can always be changed. You can always do something different, but don't just go in blindly following a controller. Make sure they know that you have concerns about what you're doing and where you're going. That's the only way we can help. And with that, I will turn it over to Clint Johnson. He's the chief of the Alaska region for the NTSB, and he will talk through some of his concerns and thoughts.
All right, well, thank you very much. If I can have you released, there we go. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for that intro. I appreciate it very much. And greetings from Alaska. As Matt indicated, I'm the chief of the Alaska Regional Office here in Alaska. I've been here for about 24 years. And time flies when you're having fun. But before that, I was actually in the helicopter industry. My parents came to Alaska in 1960, mid 60s, operated a number of helicopters here in Alaska until the mid 90s, late 90s. And then I got on with the board right after that. And I don't tell you that to impress anybody, because it's not really that impressive, quite frankly. But it does give me a little bit different of a perspective as far as when I walk into an operation, specifically a helicopter operation that has just suffered a fatal accident. I understand the pains, the angst that's going on, and can sympathize with them a little bit more, and also some of the challenges that are ahead. So with that, I'm going to give you just some brief thoughts from my standpoint and my my observations over the last 24 years. And is the accident that Shaun gave us here, or presented to us, gives us a great segue into this first point, one of 3 points here. Weather doesn't cause accidents. It's the actions of the flight crew, actions of the organization. You'll never ever see a probable cause as far as a weather causal from the NTSB. It may be a factor, maybe a finding, but weather does not cause accidents. That's point number one. Second one is we've improved our resources and the way that we investigate accidents over the years. When I first came to the board 24 some odd years ago, this accident, the one that Shaun profiled for us, very well could have been just inadvertent IMC on part of the pilot and loss of control after that. That would have been, possibly could have been the outcome. But now we have a lot more resources. The investigators, like Shaun, has a lot more in that tool bag to be able to draw on. One of the most important ones would be a human performance investigator. Back when I started with the board, it wasn't very often that for regional accident investigations, we could draw on those resources from Washington, D.C. Now it's pretty standard for us to use those human performance investigators in conjunction with the operations group chairman, and get into a little bit more of the root cause of the accident. And this accident is a great example of that. There's also other resources we used, GPS data, enhanced radar data, non-volatile memory. A lot of the state-of-the-art machines now have memories that we can actually draw on and be able to use for accident investigations. So there's a number of enhancements over the years that helps us in determining probable cause. And the last, this is my last point here, and this is just from a personal standpoint. Nobody is immune to accidents. And I think Matt Rigsby mentioned this on one of his slides. Shaun, myself, Matt have investigated hundreds of accidents over the years. We've investigated accidents with a pilot, flight crew with maybe 100 hours, just starting out. And unfortunately with flight crews with 10,000 hours. So my point with that is nobody is immune these days to accidents, unfortunately. And ultimately what we're trying to do is to keep you from following suit there. So at the end of my presentation here, before I turn it back to Rick, at our training facility in Ashburn, Washington, outside on one of the pillars out there, there's an inscription, and it basically says, "From tragedy, we draw knowledge to improve the safety of us all." And that's ultimately what the NTSB does. We're not regulatory in any sense of the imagination here. And we are the conduits basically to learn what happened, share that information to keep that accident from happening again. And with that, I will turn it back to Rick so we can get into the important part as far as the questions and answers. And I think that's where we'll gain a lot of information from.
Thank you very much, Clint. If I could ask all the panelists to turn your video back on, we'll move on to what is typically the most interesting portion of our safety symposium, is as when we address the questions from the audience. Here it's a virtual audience, but nonetheless, we'll address questions from the audience. I wanted to highlight one part of this webinar. When we started designing this safety symposium, we started looking at, I'll say, new and innovative ways to look at safety culture and inadvertent IMC. And we came up with the idea of a part that's not often mentioned, and that is the assistance that air traffic control can offer a pilot who wanders into inadvertent IMC. It's the same in the US as it is internationally, and so that's why we invited Matt Cabak to be a part of this discussion today, to bring that additional perspective of another tool that's available to a pilot who gets into IMC. HAI stresses that once you get into IIMC, or inadvertent instrument meteorological conditions, you've made several mistakes already. The first decision should be not to go. But if you do get to that point, then air traffic control services are available to you. With that said, we have several questions here that I'm going to offer up to members of the panel here. I'm going to start with some nuts and bolts questions to Shaun about the actual investigation, and then we'll move on to the larger issues of safety culture, et cetera. So the first question that came, Shaun, was it 28 seconds from the time the request went to the OCC, or from the time the OCS, the specialist, sent the request to the pilot? What was that 28-second period?
Yeah, so actually in this accident, the OCS, the Operations Control Specialist, took the flight request from the requesting facility. They are also the one that contacted the pilot. From the time they contacted the pilot until the time the pilot said yes was 28 seconds.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that for us. Shaun, was the helicopter equipped with an autopilot or any type of stability augmentation system?
It was not.
Very good. A question for Matt Rigsby. The NTSB report mentions a lack of a pre-flight risk assessment, but at a more basic level, what are the federal aviation regulations regarding a PIC conducting a pre-flight inspection of an aircraft prior to getting airborne?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, each pilot should be doing a thorough pre-flight before they take that aircraft for the day. I believe most helicopter ambulance services, on an 8-hour shift, they typically do a very detailed pre-flight inspection at the beginning of the shift, and then a cursory pre-flight inspection before they take each individual flight. So there's a requirement to do it at least before each flight. And I think that varies greatly between each individual and another pilot, each pilot's responsibility.
And Shaun, a follow on to that question, you didn't mention a pre-flight inspection in your investigation. Was a pre-flight inspection completed, and did that in any way contribute to the accident?
So the night shift pilot pre-flighted the machine, and then they got it started. We're loading up the GPS. The accident pilot drove straight to the pad, and from what we gathered, ran straight into the machine, jumped in the seat, and then they departed shortly thereafter.
Okay, thank you. A question was asked regarding instrument qualification. Was this pilot instrument qualified, and was she proficient?
Rated, yes. Qualified, current, no.
A question for Matt Rigsby. Looking at the statistics that you shared regarding IIMC, why are older and more experienced pilots the ones who are having the IIMC accidents?
That's a good question, Rick. What we believe is there's somewhat of a belief of complacency, or that it won't happen to me. Most likely, I feel that most pilots probably have done it before and got away with it, so they're more willing to accept the risk as they go along. So I don't really know if we can put our finger on one thing, but I believe complacency is a big part of that.
Very good. All right. Another question for Shaun. During the brief, the NTSB stated that all aspects of flight operations funneled through to the DO, and even the DOM reported to the DO. Now, I know that it's not uncommon in commercial aviation for the director of maintenance to report to the director of operations. But in this case, can you expand a bit more on how this contributed to the accident?
So we found through previous flights that crews were even not allowed to what was called go red. So they weren't allowed to be down for one reason or another. And in this case, what we found was everything fell under the director of operations purview. So if a pilot refused for maintenance or something, the DO would call. And so everything led right up to that person.
Okay, good. This question, I think, is more for Clint, although Shaun, you might want to answer it also. So much of attention in this particular accident was paid to safety culture as a probable cause for the accident. As an organizational influence, did safety culture specifically contribute to the accident chain? And I'm sure, Clint, you've seen this many times in accidents you've investigated regarding safety culture. What's the direct connection between safety culture and the aircraft impacting the ground?
So if we're talking specifically about this accident, I think I'll let Shaun take that one, if you don't mind there, Shaun. That's a little bit more in your lane.
Oh, and that's fine. Thanks, Clint. When you have a poor safety culture that is pushing you to go, and you are berated or put down constantly, or your concerns are just brushed aside, how likely are you to turn down another flight for weather? How many times do you want to get that call saying, you should have gone, why didn't you go? You don't want to hear from the DO all the time. So eventually you start accepting that risk and go to keep the phone from ringing.
Very good. Shaun, Clint, anything you want to add about safety culture and accidents that you've seen?
No, I think that the term safety culture in an operation pretty well sums it up. And I think that Shaun hit the nail on the head there.
We have a couple questions here about instrument qualifications. And it might be best for Matt Rigsby in this case. The question is, why are instrument qualified and instrument instructor qualified pilots not maintaining instrument proficiency? And how much does HAI do to teach how individuals make different decisions based on who they are despite all their training. So this relates probably more to your safety working group perspective, but also why do you feel that instrument qualified pilots don't maintain proficiency?
My opinion, cost. It's the cost of maintaining that currency. A lot of operators, you know, within in any training budget, if you're a VFR only company, a lot of them don't see the need to maintain currency. There's no requirement to it. Now, a lot of operators, you know, with the new 135 op specs, and they are required to demonstrate that they can get out of instrument IMC events. They should be checking for that, both at a check airman level and the FAA level. But as far as a requirement for maintaining or being instrument current, there is no regulatory requirements. I personally think cost is the biggest part of that. It's not like riding a bike. You need to stay proficient.
Agreed. This question for Clint is not necessarily related to this accident, but we have a question. How do you arrive at a career position to be an NTSB investigator? I know a lot of people say that looks like it'd be a really cool job, but how do you get to be an NTSB investigator?
Well, first of all, you got to be really cool, you know, of course. I'm kidding. So I mean, the best way to answer that, Rick, is we hire for industry. I'll take Shaun as an example. He was a 121 pilot for a regional airline. He had experience with the FAA as well. So I mean, he fit the bill perfectly. So we basically are drawing upon your experience. When you walk through the door, we send you to our academy. We turn you into investigators. That training time takes on average about 5 years. So it's not like you walk in the door and become an investigator, a senior investigator right away. So basically, to answer your question, we hire from industry where we draw upon that experience.
Very good. We have some more questions coming in specifically regarding the accident. So Shaun, this will be addressed to you. How can an accepting pilot in the helicopter air ambulance world be aware of flight turndowns by other air operators unless it is volunteered by the requester?
So there is, for one, a website, weatherturndown.com, where a lot of operators go in and put this information down. But it's actually I believe it's in the regulation that says that the operator must have a method or a procedure for determining if the flight had been previously declined. So the FAA puts the onus back on the operator to find out how, whether that's asking or looking at the website, something like that. That onus goes back on them.
Another question regarding the accident. You mentioned that the outer link flight data monitoring system was installed. Was the voice recording capability installed, and did you use that in your investigation?
The voice was installed. However, there had been a change. I believe it was an update to the system right about the time of the accident where this machine had not undergone that update. So the audio was not of the quality that was really all that usable. Once that update had been done, other machines were able to get better quality. Outerlink was aware of the issue and had already put a fix in place.
So follow up, Shaun, again to you regarding the autopilot question. There have been FAA regulation changes in regards to the added value of a radar altimeter and terrain warning system, or terrain warning system, or TAWS. Was the added value of autopilots as mandatory in helicopter air ambulance ops ever considered by the FAA? So maybe Shaun and Matt, if I'm not sure whose lane that's in.
So, I mean, I can say that we've started comparing things from other accidents, and the NTSB, prior to the 2014 HIMSS rule, had made a recommendation for autopilots to be, I believe, required for 135 HAA operations. The final rule came out that required instrument pilots. So anything beyond that, I'll pass it off to Matt, and let him take it from there.
Thanks, Shaun. Yes, back during the initial phases of the HAI rule, back when it started back in 2010, we actually, myself and several others, fought for that, at least a 2-axis autopilot, to try to get that as part of the rule. And it ultimately came down to that twofold role of the FAA as far as safety and economic development. And when we went to back in then 2010, before technology advances of today, it became a cost issue, and it became it didn't pass the sniff test as far as cost when it came to OPM, the Office of Management and Budget, OPM. And so administrator for a day, yes, 2-axis autopilots, I'd mandate them, as well as a placard in the aircraft that says, "This machine does not have a brain, use your own." So I love 2-axis. I think it'd be a huge advantage. And now that the cost has come down, I definitely think it's something that the FAA, along with industry support, should reevaluate. So.
Thank you. Question for Matt Cabak. Could it not be recommended that student pilots be trained how to declare an emergency? Should it not be that the first time a pilot says the words "is in an actual emergency," it seems like a worthy thing to introduce in training? With your air traffic control background, do you have a feeling on that, an opinion on that?
Yeah, and I'm a pilot myself, and I grew up at a towered airport, so I was always comfortable talking with air traffic control, and my instructor was always, the first thing, fly the airplane, but after you're done flying the airplane, talk to ATC and let them know what's going on. Really, we would definitely recommend that for CFIs out there teaching their students. You want to make sure they know how to get a hold of air traffic control, and make sure they know when to declare an emergency and what help that brings by having those discussions.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Have a couple questions regarding helicopter air ambulance operations. Shaun, you may have answers to this from your work on this particular investigation. What portion of air ambulance flights are conducted IFR, filed IFR, rather than VFR? And if a low proportion, why so?
We pulled that data back in, as far as from the accident side of it, we pulled the IFR accidents back when we were first investigating this event. However, at this point, I can't recall that data to be able to answer that.
Okay. Matt Rigsby, do you have any information on that?
Sorry, Rick, what was the question again? I apologize.
What percentage of helicopter air ambulance flights are conducted IFR, filed IFR versus VFR?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I would guess to say 10% or under. The majority are VFR.
And do you know why they're VFR and not IFR?
Again, I think it's probably cost. The cost of both equipping the aircraft and then keeping everybody maintained and current. But again, that's I'm guessing. So
very good. We can try to get that statistic for you when we can get it posted through rotor.org, because I know that statistic is out there. It's an annual report that's filed with the FAA. A question about safety culture, and Shaun, in your investigation, was the lack of safety culture in this company and the DO's lack of supporting a positive safety culture noticed prior to this event? Did anyone notice it?
We found no indications that it was noticed prior to this event.
Question from Matt. Is the FAA considering increasing VFR weather minimums and introducing lowest safe altitude or LSALTs for night operations?
not at this time that I'm aware of.
a question for Shaun. Was crew resource management training given to both pilots and medical crew at this company?
Separate, usually not together. They didn't do the training as a cohesive unit.
Can you comment on the separate versus combined?
So for crew resource management, I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, it would be the entire crew. The med crew would be working with the pilots to know who's doing what and how you can work together the best way possible. What we found here was the pilots did their own training and then the med crew kind of did their own. So that interaction happened on the job as opposed to in the classroom.
A question regarding VFR weather minimums for Part 135 operators. And I'll offer this to Shaun or to Clint, probably more Shaun. Did you see a problem with VFR operations for Part 135 operating in special VFR in Class G airspace with weather minima as low as 300.5 mile day or 501 at night? Was that brought into the investigation?
No, because no special VFR was requested. So we didn't look at that.
So there was no special VFR.
No record, no.
Do you, another question on the investigation. Did this organization require or use simulator training in their training program?
No, all their training was done in the helicopter.
This is a question, I think, for Clint, since this is kind of your world of work. It's a question regarding SMS for Part 135 operators. We know that the NTSB, as one of their most wanted for this year, has recommended SMS for all passenger carrying revenue operations. It still isn't required, but what are the opinions on using SMS as a safety system for the entire EMS organization, not only for the aviation related safety for the organization?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to give that one to Shaun, but I mean, great idea, but our recommendation, or is the most wanted, is a little bit more pinpoint as far as the revenue flights, basically. But Shaun, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. This is, again, kind of your lane there.
And I apologize, the dog barked here. Can you just repeat that question for me, Rick?
The question related to use of SMS in Part 135 operations and related to the 10 most wanted this year. And the question was, we know it still is not required for Part 135 operators to have an SMS, but specific to helicopter air ambulances, what is your opinion about using SMS as a safety system for the entire organization and not just for the aviation related portion of the air ambulance?
In a perfect world, we would like to see it across the organization. That's how it's going to be the most effective. You get buy-in from everybody. So, you know, the mechanics know the same thing to expect as the dispatchers, and there's all one way to funnel in, you know, safety concerns so that they're dealt with across the board.
You mentioned that this case survival flight had an outer link flight data monitoring system. Was there a FOQA or flight operations quality assurance program active?
There was not, and that was part of the problem. And one of the things that we discussed in the report was having all this data and doing nothing with it does nothing to help promote safety. It doesn't move the needle. It's just collecting data and storing it on a hard drive.
Again, Shaun, I'm sorry, we're focusing on you, but you're most intimate with this particular organization, the accident. If you were applying for an air medical transport team position, what questions and answers would sell you to the program that they have an adequate safety culture?
Oh boy. You know, and we found this in this investigation, but we've heard about it in other forums and symposiums. How many safety reports do you get? Here they had one in a year and a half. We've had others that they said, oh yeah, I had one in 3 years, but then you talk to some companies, that have a full-blown SMS and a robust safety program, and they're just getting, 40 reports, a quarter or something. That kind of tells you that people aren't afraid to speak up, right? I mean, you get people that are going to send these in, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, very, very well put. Let's see. Shaun, it seems like the management team at this program was very inexperienced and lacked knowledge in the fundamental aspects related to personnel management and accepted safety standards. When the FSDO received the names of the DO, chief pilot and director of maintenance candidates, how are they vetted? Was that part of your investigation, the vetting of these management positions?
So these folks were all vetted by the POIs in accordance with the 8900 guidance and the regulations. So anything further to that, as far as what that process is like, I'm going to pass it off to Matt and kind of let him discuss that a little bit.
Repeat that, Rick.
The question is the vetting of the management positions, the 119 positions at the organization. What is the process the FAA uses to vet a director of operations, director of maintenance, and a chief pilot, that they have the adequate management skills to run an organization?
Yeah, all that's based at the principal inspectors level, and it's based on the certificate management team's evaluation. Both the principal operations inspector, the principal maintenance inspector, and the principal avionics inspector. They get together, review with their management team, and evaluate each position based on their experience level and some guidance that they have in their handbook to evaluate it, and then either approve or disapprove those 119 officials based on the individual's experience as well as the inspector's experience.
Okay, I think we're getting here. I'd like to close with something for each of you to answer, and that's regarding what the takeaway is from this accident and how it applies both in the safety culture as well as the double IMC world. So I guess I'll start with you, Shaun. What is your takeaway from this accident?
The biggest thing that we saw with this accident was just how we had people coming out of the woodwork to talk to us following this accident. The number of interviews we did in the short time following it was something I haven't seen before. And most of it revolved around the safety culture and the way people felt, they were being treated and things like that. That if management had listened to the employees prior to this accident may have been prevented. They may have found different ways to do things, but it was all ignored. When letters were written or safety reports were made, it was all ignored. So by having a healthy safety culture, it could have prevented this accident from ever happening. Could have prevented the helicopter from even getting off the ground, really.
Well, thank you. Matt Cabak, what do you take away from this discussion today?
I think it's very important to be cognizant of our abilities as pilots and recognize that we're not superheroes. Sometimes we need help. And the first step to solving a problem is admitting you have one. And if you're approaching weather minimums, or if you're approaching cloud layers that look unforgiving, before you get into those, reach out for help or turn around, arrive alive, whatever you want to say. But have a plan, execute a plan. When the plan doesn't go as expected, know who to reach out to help and get the help you need to get safely on the ground.
Land and live is the term we like.
There you go.
All right. Clint, takeaway for you from this accident or this webinar?
Yeah, and kind of restate what Shaun said maybe a little differently here. NTSB guys like Shaun and I are professional armchair quarterbacks, and I don't say that to be funny by any means, but we're not going to be judgmental. But basically, we look at people's and also organizations' mistakes, and we're the conduit to get that information and those mistakes out to the general flying public, HAI members or the general flying public. There's a lot of information. This is a very target-rich environment with this accident, and Shaun did a tremendous job, and his team did a great job. There's a lot of information that can be learned from this if you take the time to look at the accident report on our website and also look in the docket. There's a tremendous amount of information that we can all learn from.
Thank you, Clint. Well stated. And Matt, what do you take away from this accident and this webinar discussion?
Rick, I kind of agree with everybody actually, but I think complacency. I think that as an industry and as a pilot, we all get so ingrained in completing the task and doing the job. We get to that point where we say, well, yeah, I'll give it a try. If you see yourself doing that, then that may be the point where you need to step back and say, let's stop, let me reevaluate and rerun that risk assessment. So it can happen to anybody. Don't get complacent to think the accident won't happen to you because you are that superhero, or your opinion of yourself is that superhero. It can happen to you, and it has happened to the experience level at all levels, from low time to high time. So always be safe.
Great. Thank you all for this. And to our audience out there, if this intrigued you, if you were found this interesting and of value, please join us in Dallas at HELI-EXPO, where we'll do another safety symposium. Likely it'll be on the Monday before the start of HAI, so the HELI-EXPO. So please make it a point to attend the safety symposium. We're sure you'll walk away with new information. And with that said, I'll turn it back to Dan Sweet.
Oh, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Matt. And of course, thank you, Chris. Clint. A presentation like this is bound to help a lot of people. I know that sometimes you might feel like you're preaching to the choir. Hopefully, the people who are viewing it live or viewing it on the video will be able to take something away from this, and we'll hopefully share it with other pilots. So want to extend our deepest gratitude to each of you for taking the time today to help improve the quality and safety of our industry.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of little housekeeping items. There was supposed to be an accident file that was going to be made available today to share with the audience. Regretfully, I could not figure out which switches I needed to move over in Zoom to make that happen. And so what we are going to do is we will be emailing that file to everybody, both the registrants and to the attendees. For those of you who are watching this on video, if you go to the HAI website, rotor.org/webinars, and click on the right column where the archived videos are, we will make sure that this attachment is also included there. We do apologize. Sometimes technology gets the better of me. I do regret that. And got a couple other housekeeping items here just real quick. I think that's showing the correct slide, hopefully. Please save the date. Maybe I do have the wrong one up. Let me double check that. I see where I got the problem. There we go. Save the date. HAI at Work webinar for next week. On patrol with the Texas Department of Public Safety. They have the second largest public law enforcement agency in the nation. And they have a fleet of helicopters, 25 helicopters that gathers 23,000 hours a year. And so we're going to get an overview of them. Plus, the standards and processes for applying for a job with them. Should be a very good webinar. We do have a questionnaire that will be coming here very shortly. We do ask that you take a few minutes to fill it out, and hopefully we get some good feedback. We do pay attention to these. We do want to learn what you would like to hear in upcoming webinars. We're always interested in what you think about the process itself, what you like, what you didn't like. As always, we also want to know the same information for HAI. What can we do better for you? What can we do better for the industry? What can we do better for the members? If you have something in particular, please let us know. The best way to do it is send an email to Jim Viola, the president and CEO, at president@rotor.org. He sees every email and then he passes them along to the staff for action. The Mars helicopter is still flying and flying well. They've actually started to plan to expand the missions of this Mars helicopter that is the first helicopter, the first aircraft to fly controlled, powered on another planet. If you're interested, HAI's web store has some great merchandise commemorating this first flight. So swing on over to the store. The website is up there on this screen right now. Go ahead and do a capture, the print screen, snippet or something. Use your phone. I'll hold it for just a second and then we'll take it and move on. And that does conclude the webinar for today. We do appreciate that you took the time to join us. Until next week, we ask that you be safe, that you fly safe, and we will see you then.